We know that the Christian life is rich in relationships. We have covered discipleship relationships and discussed discipleship conversations. So what does contemporary discipleship look like? That's what we're looking at today. Another word for discipleship is apprenticeship. And in the modern day, we have all kinds of apprentices. Apprentice builders, apprentice doctors, apprentice electricians and architects, and plumbers and teachers. But discipleship is different because we are not training for a particular profession, we are training to become more like Jesus. So, contemporary discipleship has to be modeled on Jesus' practice, how he actually made disciples. Well, how then did Jesus make disciples? Jesus chose some people and not others. And this immediately seems unfair, but think about it for a moment. It is not possible to go relationally deep with hundreds or even thousands of people. It is only possible to go relationally deep with a few. And the depth of relationship we have with people determines our power to influence them for good. Let me say that again. The depth of relationship we have with people determines our power to influence them for good. Therefore, Jesus only chose a few. So in your discipleship practice, prayerfully choose a few to disciple, even just one or two. Out of the thousands of people out there, God has the ones for you. In contemporary discipleship, prayerfully choose a few to disciple. Jesus invested in people who said yes by his actions. This one's really important. I remember someone I had decided to personally invest in to disciple. I committed myself to this guy. I committed myself to discipling him. I got on well with him. I really liked him. And I could see God was at work in his life. The problem was every time I arranged to catch up with him, he made an excuse. Over time, it became very clear that while I was committed to our friendship, he wasn't, because he was not saying yes by his actions. When Jesus invested in the 12, they responded. He called them to follow him, and they responded by doing so. They said yes by their actions. My friend consistently did not say yes by his actions, and therefore my efforts were a waste of time. I had to learn the hard way and then move on. Hopefully one day someone will disciple him, but he was not my responsibility. Because in contemporary discipleship, you invest in people who say yes by their actions. With that particular friend, I persisted for quite a long time, thinking he was my responsibility, thinking the shepherd continues to go after the stray sheep from Luke 15. But that wasn't actually the case. You see, I had not yet learned what I later learned, that in discipleship there are three parts: my part, their part, and God's part. God will always do his part, and I am only responsible for my part, but the other person is responsible for their part. And when I embraced this truth, it was clarifying and freeing. Next, Jesus spent time with his disciples. They did ministry together, they ate together, they traveled together, they went fishing together, they had fun together. They kicked back and relaxed and had dinners together. At the center of how Jesus made disciples was this: he spent time with them. As author Günter Kraumann says, Jesus viewed discipling as life transference through the channel of relationship. Jesus' method of making disciples was time together. So, contemporary discipleship must look like time together Monday to Saturday, as well as time together on Sundays. In contemporary discipleship, spend time with your people. And this may sound easy, but actually we know this is quite hard because the modern life means that we are quite time poor. One guy that I know was being discipled by a friend of his, and so he rocked up to his house to spend time with him, but his discipler was about to go out and run some errands. And so the discipler simply said, come with me to the supermarket as I go and do the family's grocery shopping. You can call this add one or two to what you do. Contemporary discipleship is hard because life is busy and we are time poor. So add one or two to what you do. Don't create something new to do, but simply add them to what you're already doing. Someone else I know was effectively included into the family of the man who was discipling him. And so he would go around and have dinner with the family at least once a week. He would regularly babysit for his disciplers' kids. When the discipler was going out of town, he would often invite him with him, and they would go together on these ministry trips or on these road trips together. But the point was, the discipler was making space in his or her life for the person that they were discipling. Add one or two to what you do. We can learn not only from Jesus, but also from the Apostle Paul, one of history's greatest disciple makers. And something he said is really helpful. On behalf of his friends, Paul says to the Thessalonian church, "Night and day we prayed earnestly for you, asking God to let us see you again, so that we would fill in the gaps in your faith." You see, everyone has gaps in their faith, things they don't know about and or haven't yet incorporated into their life. One friend of mine believed that if he had enough faith, it was possible to see 100% healing every time he prayed for someone to be healed. And don't get me wrong, I love his audacity, I love his passion, but sadly that's not biblical. What he didn't understand, a gap in his faith, was that the Bible teaches that God's kingdom at the moment is like a deposit. If you think about buying a house, if you buy a house, you put a deposit down, and a deposit, 10 or 20%, it's real, it's tangible, it is actual money, but it's only a small proportion of the total amount. The reality is, the majority is still to come in the future. So 100% healing, which is part of God's kingdom, is not actually possible until Jesus returns, because at the moment we only have the kingdom by deposit, not the full amount. My friend had a gap in his faith, and so my job was to fill in that gap through biblical teaching. And in contemporary discipleship, this is what we do. We help people fill in the gaps. You have gaps in your faith, so do I. What gaps do you have in your faith? What gaps do your friends and family have in their faith? And it's sometimes hard to answer this, because sometimes they're blind spots and we're not even aware of them, which is why we have to be in relationship with other people, because they can see things in us and not in us that we can't see ourselves. Now, some gaps are knowledge gaps, but other gaps are gaps of obedience, things that we have not yet incorporated into our lives. You see, knowing the truth about the Sabbath is great, but only practicing the Sabbath will give us the restoration that we need. Knowing about giving is essential, but until I become a committed giver, money and perhaps selfishness and mammon and other things potentially have a hold over me. In contemporary discipleship, then, we help people fill in the gaps. Contemporary discipleship looks like these different things that we've covered. Which of these practices are already a natural part of your life? And are there any practices that you need to start doing?